Welcome to this week's podcast. Today, my guest is Izzy Rodriguez, aka Happy Healthy Izzy on Instagram. Izzy has a degree in biomedicine and is a qualified nutritionalist. She has interest in doing more triathlons, having done her first triathlon a couple of years ago. Of course, naturally, you run, cycle, and swim. Welcome to the podcast, Izzy.
Thanks for having me.
Shall we? This topic, the topic of nutrition, has come up so many times, either in conversation with other triathletes and runners, and also on this podcast. There's everyone says they have trouble with nutrition. So, I mean, I'm really interested and really looking forward to this podcast. I think it's going to be great insight into things that I certainly need to know, and certainly the listeners will need to know. But should we just start off by you explaining who you are and your background?
Yeah, so I have just done, last year, my diploma in nutrition and weight loss management. And this year I completed my degree in biomedical science. So that kind of gives me an extra scientific background. And this past year, I've kind of been posting lots of information on nutrition on Instagram, and just to kind of give people the information they need to kind of go about through life however they want to take that information, whether that's for weight loss, for muscle gain, for sport, so like endurance sports like triathlons like you. And I've just kind of gone from there really, and tried to kind of eliminate and put right all those fad diets and misinformation out there. So
yeah, I really like your Instagram account. I think your recipes, and especially you're vegan as well, aren't you? So
yeah, I am vegan. Yeah, been vegan for about 2 years now.
Yeah, I've been a vegan for a couple of years as well, and I must admit it's got easier over the last few years. But it's good to see other people, posting recipes and ideas, because you do kind of run out of ideas when you're a vegan. You're kind of limited, or you can be limited.
And with like more and more people are becoming vegan now, aren't they? So like the supermarkets are posting more and more vegan foods, which is great. So every week there's always like something new to try, which I love.
So what got you into nutrition as a specialism?
Yeah, so I did a nutrition module in my uni degree, and that kind of explained all the science behind it. And I was just kind of always scrolling through Instagram, reading stuff on Instagram and TikTok and everything, and thinking that's not what I learned. Like surely that's not right. And then I'd go and kind of research it myself through like PubMed and other like research journals, and most of the information that was being put out there was wrong. And I was thinking, well, I may as well kind of get a diploma or a qualification which kind of allows me to kind of legally teach people and properly educate myself about nutrition, because it really annoyed me. Like as being a girl, I've tried many of fad diets out there throughout like the whole of my teenage years, and it's quite like stressful, and especially growing up with such an abundant amount of information out there. It's like, what do I trust, and which one's right and which one works, for whatever goal you have. So that's why I kind of started, mainly like just pure anger at the kind of wellness fitness industry. And yeah, I went from there. And I'm a bit of a nerd, so I love to read about nutrition and food. I love cooking, and yeah, that's kind of where it all started. And I'm really enjoying it. So I'm just keep going, really.
It must be quite frustrating for you, having the expertise in nutrition, to see some of the things that are posted on social media. I get frustrated. I don't know the subject as well as you, but I know the basic facts, and you see some things and you think that's not right.
Yeah. I don't know how people can kind of post that information out there, really. But I'm trying to do my bit to kind of counteract that anyway. So yeah.
Yeah, I like the little snippets of information you give as well. It's I think there's science can be quite difficult to understand, and actually some of the things you post on Instagram, where it's like a snippet of information, just a short, sharp kind of explanation as to why it's important to do, take carbs, take protein, etc., is really useful.
Yeah, oh, thank you. That's what I plan to do, and so I'm glad you're kind of benefiting from it.
Shall we just go on to the subject of why nutrition is important. Just in terms, obviously there's different angles that we can take on this. There's the impact on sports performance, and the advantages that you get from strength and conditioning, but also the elements of kind of weight loss, weight gain. As someone that has struggled with, certainly up until 4 years ago, struggled with weight loss. So where should we start? Should we start with kind of sports performance and kind of strength and conditioning?
Yeah, let's start with that. So think of food as kind of a source of energy, and we need to be able to kind of consume that energy to be able to output it for performance. So what we eat really does kind of affect our performance, but that is secondary to training. So obviously training will kind of give you your fitness and that muscle mass in order to be able to do that sport. But then in order for recovery and kind of to sustain that performance, then nutrition is really, really key, especially if you're looking at racing or kind of competing. And then even increasing your performance by like 1 or 2% will make a massive difference in terms of how many people you beat or how many seconds you can get off your PB. So yeah, no, it is really important, but it is secondary to training.
Yeah. So one of the aspects and questions that I've continuously been asked through this podcast, and also people that are getting into triathlon, is kind of how important is fueling, and how important is when you're training for endurance sports, how important it is to kind of take the right types of foods. And it can make a massive difference. And again, we're all different, aren't we? So, not one person has the same energy system as another. So it's always going to be a struggle to actually, copy someone else, for example.
Yeah, especially like, I don't know if you see on Instagrams, like the what I eat in a days, etc. That can be very misleading. Like I would eat completely different to you because I'm smaller, I'm a woman, and I have a regular menstrual cycle, and that is completely different to you and your biology and how you kind of process energy. So yeah, it's really important to kind of know what you need instead of kind of compare yourselves to others, even if they are similar age or biological sex. Everyone's different.
Yeah. So just in terms of advantages of kind of nutrition on kind of weight loss and weight gain, how important is it that someone that's focusing on someone that's, let's start with someone that's focusing with weight loss, how important is it that they count calories, for example, versus the types of food that they take in? My background was my weight yo-yoed from a teenager right the way through to up to 4 years ago, and now I'm at a weight that is below what it should be, slightly below what it should be, and it's stable. But it hasn't always been that way, and I've done fatty diets. I did one fatty diet in particular that nearly killed me.
Yeah.
So, I mean, how important is it that calorie counting and a deficit of calories, how important is that in terms of kind of someone that's looking to lose weight?
Yeah, so unless you have some kind of metabolic disorder or other medical condition, then a calorie deficit is essential in order to lose weight, because you need to be consuming less energy than you're burning. And that doesn't mean exercise, so it doesn't mean you need to eat less calories than the calories you burn exercising. It's your kind of total daily calorie expenditure. So that includes all kinds of like bodily functions like breathing, keeping yourself warm, digesting. And yeah, for weight loss, you need to eat less than you burn, and that is essential. But I don't think calorie tracking is necessarily essential, as long as you kind of know what foods, the calorie content of certain foods. Maybe I sometimes advise people to kind of count calories for two weeks, and then once they kind of know how many calories are in each food, then they don't need it. It can be quite restrictive for some people or addictive for some people. So if you're one of those people, then maybe don't do it, and add calorie dense foods and like general nutrition. But yeah, a calorie deficit is needed to lose weight.
it's interesting because I counted calories for the entire time that I've been training for triathlon. So I've been using MyFitnessPal, sorry, and I found that really stressful because first of all I had to work out exactly what I'd eaten and then record it. And for 3.5 years, did that every single day, tracking my calories, working out how much I'd burnt during training, and then working out that I'd got the right balance. I stopped doing that 5 weeks ago. Mainly because I just got fed up with doing the app, and also trying to work out because I'd often forget. I'd often forget to record something and then go, "What did I eat on Thursday?" and then try to kind of backtrack on it. But what I've noticed is by not using the app, I actually think I'm actually probably more precise on what I need just through intuitive eating.
Feeling hungry.
Yeah, exactly.
Obviously, you train a lot. Maybe one day you have a really long bike ride, and say MyFitnessPal will put you on the same calories every day. You'll obviously be more hungry on a day where you have a long bike ride than a rest day. I
was overeating as well because I was thinking I need to balance, the exercise with the extra food, and sometimes you don't need to do that. Sometimes you've already got the glycogen there. So, that's really, really, really interesting. I realize that not every person is the same, but generally speaking, what are the key elements of nutrition for someone that's training for an endurance event, running, cycling, triathlon? What should they be focusing on?
Primarily carbohydrates. That needs to cover kind of at least 50% of your diet. 50 to 55% is kind of what's recommended for your general health. And then fats are also important. That should be about 30% of your diet should be fat. And then protein, anything kind of from 15 to 20, 25% is what's usually recommended. But another way you can work protein out is from doing 1 to 1.6 grams of protein per a kilo of your body weight per a day. And that's just the kind of general guidelines. But obviously it varies depending on how much exercise you're doing, what exercise you're doing, what your goal is. If you want to build muscle, you can kind of increase it a bit more.
Yeah, it's really, really good. Just in terms of, someone that's training for an endurance event, so I don't know, half Ironman. The thing I've realised is that I thought I had more of a dependency on taking gels during runs, for example, or through a cycle. Someone that is actually kind of being going through the training that they do, 10 to 12 hours of training every week. Increasing their carbohydrates, is there any kind of recommendation on how they should be getting those carbohydrates, like how soon before their training, or should it be little and often, or does it depend on the person?
So before and after?
Yeah.
So it depends if it's for training or if it's for a race. There's something for a race you can do. I don't know if you've heard of carbohydrate loading.
Yeah.
And what's recommended is you kind of increase your carbohydrates kind of 24 to 48 hours before your race, and that will kind of fill up all your glycogen stores in your liver and your muscles, and make sure that you have the maximum amount of glycogen available for your body to use to then break down to use for energy. But a quick tip as well for people who are racing in the morning, that's usually after obviously 8 hours of sleep, and your liver glycogen levels usually kind of deplete. It's recommended that you have kind of a single dose of 1 to 4 grams of carbohydrate per kilo of body weight any time before your race, if it's in the morning, just to kind of really top up and maximize the amount of glycogen you have in your body. So that's a quick tip for you. And before and after exercise, you should really be having carbohydrates before and after, but if your exercise is kind of less than an hour, then there's no need to take anything with you apart from water, obviously. And after, then you need to kind of restore those glycogen stores. So definitely get some carbohydrates in kind of as soon as you can, but it's not really an emergency, but definitely within an hour if you can. If not, then it's not a massive problem. You'll just probably feel tighter for longer, and it might take you a bit longer to kind of repair.
Just as someone that religiously took gels, running with him all the time, I found that actually, I mean, I don't know whether this is true or not, but I found that actually a lot of the feeling of being fatigued and not, and because I haven't taken enough fuel, because my mind is telling me I haven't taken enough fuel, is often mental. And so it's sometimes I think for me on a 10K run, for example, at 6K, and I've spoke about this before in podcasts, I have like a barrier to get through. I certainly did have in the past. And so I'd anticipate that barrier of kind of knowing that at 6K, I know I'm going to start to deplete my glycogen levels and I'm going to start to feel fatigued. But I question whether that was actually ever a result of nutrition and more of a case of I had overthought that 6K barrier and started to make it a barrier.
When you know too much about a subject, then it can also be negative. Like, they say doctors make the worst patients.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also fitness, like you might have just been having a bad day, or you might not have been as fit as you wanted to. But yeah, if you're doing sub-hour 10Ks, then you probably didn't need it. Obviously, the last 10 minutes might be a push, but you won't need to take anything because it takes your body a good while to kind of process those carbs and store them as glycogen, and then be able to for your body to be able to use it again.
Yeah.
So that wouldn't have been enough time for your body to do that, basically.
Yeah. Just in terms of the nutrition for post training or post race, how important is it to take on carbohydrate and protein as soon as you finish that training or that race? Is there really a kind of golden period of time that you need to do that?
So I think people kind of think of this as something that is really essential, and people kind of race after race to get all their fuel in and nutrition in straight after. It's not 100% necessary, but the general rule is kind of have your protein within 2 hours. Ideally closer, better, but if not, no worries. I haven't seen many studies which have kind of tested this, but as long as you have kind of, it's advised, I think it's 0.3 grams per kilo of body weight of protein within 2 hours after a race. That should then be more than enough. So it's no rush. Like, it'd be great if you had a protein shake and just take it when you feel ready, really, after a race. And then carbohydrates, again, it's recommended that you have 8 to 10 grams of carbs per kilo of body weight per a day. No, within 24 hours, sorry, of doing a race. So yeah, that's within 24 hours. Obviously, it'd be good to kind of replenish some glycogen stores straight away. So within an hour, that would be good. Like have a banana, have a bit of pasta or rice or whatever, because you might be hungry anyway. But the main thing is to just kind of keep eating carbs throughout the 24 hours as well, because you would have depleted a lot, especially during like a half or full Ironman. So
Yeah, absolutely.
must do this within 10 minutes. It's not like that, and everybody is different as well, again. So depending on how much muscle you have or how big your glycogen stores are, will also depend on that as well.
So we talked about this on previous weeks on the podcast about nutrition and about kind of the importance of trial and error for an athlete. I think what you do as a nutritionalist is really, really, I think undervalued. I think, and I've said this before, that people that go into training for a marathon, a triathlon, they will often think about what they need to do in terms of buying equipment, what they need to do in terms of training, what they need to
Yeah.
do to prepare for the race, and won't think really that much about nutrition, because that's just eating and drinking. And I've learned over the years, actually, that's probably the fourth discipline, because I can't perform unless I've taken the right level of carbohydrate or protein.
I always think of kind of, for performance, you need four things. You need sleep, low stress levels, training, and nutrition. And with all four of those, you should be good to go. But to miss any one of them can have like quite an effect on your performance, if performance is your goal. But even weight loss or muscle gain. So any single one of those is really important. And nutrition is obviously, again, really important for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Just in terms of the types of training, I guess, that someone that's training for running or cycling or triathlon actually often entails two different types of kind of exercise type. One being aerobic, so ability to maintain a certain pace at a steady state, building on that kind of endurance. And then the other is to try and increase that endurance by doing interval-based anaerobic kind of exercise. And certainly my training plan has a mix of those two, so endurance and so aerobic and anaerobic. Is there a difference in the way that an athlete needs to approach those types of exercise with regards to fueling?
It depends, firstly. Especially, I think some people's definition of anaerobic is different to others. So anaerobic is kind of when it's very short bursts of kind of putting in maximum effort for like a sprint, basically, or interval sprints. But even if you're kind of going at a fairly hard pace for a longer time, then that is more aerobic, and you use more carbohydrate. You need more carbohydrates basically to kind of fuel that. But there's a big difference between like low intensity and medium intensity exercise. So say if you're doing a kind of zone 1, zone 2 ride, so like you're just spinning your legs for a long period of time, then fat is your main fuel. So obviously that is another reason that you need to eat fats, but that should just kind of be incorporated in your daily diet. You don't need to, and it's probably not recommended that you eat lots of fat straight before a ride. But yeah, just to make sure that you have enough fat in your daily diet will be enough for that. And then for kind of medium intensity exercise, so those are kind of your longer rides where you're pushing at up to 70% of like your VO2 max.
About 70 to 80% of your maximum heart rate, really.
Yeah, kind of doing medium intensity exercise, that's kind of 60 to 70% of your VO2 max. And there, the kind of ratio between fats and carbohydrates changes. So the more intense your exercise, the more you use carbohydrates as a fuel instead of fats. But you'll always kind of use both. But you should definitely focus on carbohydrates as a fuel. Whether that's with a banana, a gel, a protein bar, and like a sports drink, whatever kind of suits you and doesn't upset your tummy the most, then yeah, use that. But with anaerobic, your body just kind of uses the muscle glycogen. So as long as your muscle glycogen is kind of high enough, then that shouldn't really affect it, because it's for such short bursts of time. Then you don't really, always kind of, your nutrition is stable across the week and you eat enough of everything, then that should be fine.
I mean, I find it's as I said, this trial and error element, but it really is a case of kind of a nutritionist can help you with generally the sorts of foods and building a profile of how much food to take, but the athlete really is the person that's going to be able to understand how that works and how that's impacted their ability to get the most out of their training, most out of a race. I've tried.
100%.
I've done a lot of trial and error on mine in terms of my training, and I know what works and what doesn't work. I know, for example, if I'm doing intervals, I will take a few jelly sweets, and because I know that they're just absorbed quickly into the blood, and I could take them 15 minutes into the interval session, and then I regularly take them in the breaks in between because I know it's just topping up those levels.
Yeah, it does still take some time for it to kind of get into your blood and for your body to use it. But if I think you're exercising more than kind of half an hour to an hour, then that is fine. I don't.
So I've never had an experience where I felt flat, really flat, that I can't continue. Yeah. But I have had friends, for example, I've been out on the bike and we haven't stopped. We've been riding for 3 or 4 hours and we haven't really stopped much to fuel. And they've been coming up a hill and they've had to stop and say, look, I'm going to have to get something to eat because I'm feeling I'm bonking out here. Yeah. How do you know? I mean, what are the telltale signs that you feel depleted?
It's different for everyone, but the kind of main, I'd call them symptoms, is just general like fatigue, like you're just so tired. Even when you're not exercising, you kind of wake up in the morning and you're just exhausted, or you feel like, say, you're going on a run or a cycle and you just got nothing in your legs. Like, I don't know how to describe it, but you just feel like you can't carry on
can't push
that intensity, you might feel lightheaded, a bit dizzy. And then in the long term, if you're not fueling enough, then you'll obviously get some weight loss or weight gain if you're fueling too much. But yeah, general kind of signs and symptoms is, tired, fatigue, no energy. You might kind of feel hungry more, and you might also feel that burn in your legs quicker. So say you're meant to be doing a 2-hour ride, usually you only feel it in your legs like within an hour. But today you feel it in your legs within the first 20 minutes, and that's another sign that you haven't probably fueled enough, particularly with carbohydrates again.
That's good. That's really interesting. Do you know, just in terms of how are there any signs that, in terms of fatigue? Like, for example, preparing for a race, usually you have a taper week where you're keeping your exercise to a low, low intensity, just keeping the legs ticking over, keeping everything just kind of ready to race. Are there any kind of telltale signs or any sort of symptoms for whether or not you fueled enough for a race? I know that's probably quite difficult because it's going to depends on the person. But yeah. So, for example, if I was training for a triathlon this weekend, I'd be tapering this week.
Yeah.
Sorry, next weekend. I'd be tapering next week. Obviously, I'd be taking in fuel for that race. I'd be eating normal food groups, really. I probably wouldn't eat any differently until the night before and then carb up for the race. But how do I know whether I've fueled enough? I know that's a difficult question to ask, but how do I know whether I've taken on enough and topped up my glycogen levels? Are there any symptoms to show whether someone has got fatigue or is depleted?
Probably just general tiredness again. If you're like speaking in kind of like nutritional deficiency terms, in terms of like missing out vitamins like vitamin B12, iron, particularly for women, it's very important. Then there are other symptoms for that, like paleness, but fatigue is kind of a general, the main symptom for most nutritional deficiencies actually, whether that's kind of B12, like you're vegan, I'm vegan, so I think there's an increased focus on that. Vitamin D as well, that everyone should be kind of supplementing that if they're living in England, which is usually cloudy. But kind of pre-race, you can calculate it. I can get into the nitty-gritty if you like. There are like certain kind of numbers which you should be aiming for if you want to kind of track your food the day before and the day of the race. But it's mainly fatigue, tiredness. You might feel a bit even like shaky if you hadn't had enough, or if you've had too much caffeine, then that might be like go the other way, like you might have tummy upset, you might be really shaky or like feeling absolute out of it if you've had too much caffeine. But I think as long as you kind of follow, even if you follow your normal diet, you should be absolutely fine. You shouldn't feel anything other than what you feel normally, apart from like race day nerves. Yeah, I think that's a hard question.
It is.
But
I mean, it is a hard question. You watch on Insta. I don't know whether you've seen people on Instagram. Sometimes they're, where they're doing a marathon or they're doing a half marathon. The night before, they're eating 2 pizzas and a barrel load of chips. Whereas others just like, for me, the morning of a triathlon, I will have like peanut butter on toast, a banana. The night before, pasta. Pasta seems to work really well for me. I won't touch rice. I won't touch rice or anything with lots of fiber in it for obvious reasons. But those are the kind of things. And I don't overthink it, but I don't know whether I'm doing the right thing. I think that's the thing with all nutrition is there isn't a right answer.
No, and there's always going to be that one case study which contradicts what you're doing, or that one study which like says no, you're doing it wrong. But the general consensus is to just don't change up anything to your normal diet.
Absolutely, yeah.
If you eat like really what society kind of thinks of as healthy, and then suddenly have pizza and ice cream and chips, then maybe that's not the best thing to do, because firstly your stomach's not used to it and used to kind of digesting that, and is it really worth risking that just to have that kind of food before a race? So just kind of stick to what you normally eat, so you know what these foods, you know your stomach's like good with these foods, you know the kind of energy it can bring you, and just kind of keep everything at bay. Don't try and like switch up anything, which was another thing actually I wanted to quickly talk about, was trying like new gels and kind of nutritional supplements during a race. I definitely recommend that you don't change anything up. We don't want any kind of incidences or funny tummies on race day, even if you feel like you'll be going slow without it if you haven't tried it before. I would definitely recommend not to try it first time on a race day. So definitely kind of, if you can, a few weeks before, kind of have a practice of what you're going to eat on race day, and in terms of caffeine, fiber, carbohydrates, water, everything, and make sure that your tummy is absolutely fine, because adding that to kind of race day stress will really kind of heighten your the sensitivity of your stomach basically, and none of us want that, do they? So
I think that's a really, really important tip. And it has come up actually on the podcast before. I wouldn't change anything for race day. Anything, nutrition, shoes, bike. Don't, always go into it anticipating and knowing exactly what it is that you're using. And I think actually some people that rely on race day nutrition from, the tents that are out there on the race ground. I would research. I mean, a really important tip is to research what it is that they're going to provide you. If you're going to rely on, for example, taking gels, taking any type of nutrition or drinks from the nutrition tent, research what it is and try it yourself beforehand. For example, Ironman will provide Gatorade and stuff like that. I've taken Gatorade and I don't find it that great for me. And there are some gels that really upset my stomach for running. So do what you know is right and 100%. Just stick to it.
Even if it's exciting, you're like, oh, why not? I wouldn't go there personally anyway. Like when I did my triathlon, they were giving out kind of drinks and gels, and I was just like, no thanks. I bought my own. I knew they worked for me, and I didn't have any problems. So I think that just goes into just stick to what you know.
Really, really important. Really important for those, especially going into their first triathlon. Not so bad with shorter distance triathlons, but in those kind of, if you're going to a half Ironman, really long distance, then you really need to focus on what it is that what's best for you. Training's for practice, races for actually, show really. So
Yeah, exactly. If something bad happens in training, that's fine. But you don't want that happening on kind of a race you're preparing months for and you really want to do well in. It's not worth it at all, in my opinion anyway.
Absolutely. Should we talk? I mean, this is my favorite subject, actually. Any common, I've written down mistakes, but actually it's not called mistakes. Any common learnings or misleading advice that you see on social media, or is there any that you can highlight? I mean, I find it funny when you see some products that are kind of advertised on social media, especially from my background. My background of I've mentioned on the podcast before, I don't really want to bleat on about it, but I went on a diet that was just protein shakes. And I did that for 4 months, not eating anything. Ended up with gallstones, then pancreatitis, and nearly died as a result of it. So I'm highly sensitive to being approached, and always being approached on social media to become some type of ambassador for some type of diet. So, I mean, those sorts of things. Is there anything that you kind of highlight that you watch and make you furious?
Most things, to be honest. I think the general thing, I think there's a whole myth that you need all these supplements for good health, but really you can get most of it in normal food. If you don't want to take protein shakes, that's absolutely fine, especially as a vegan. That's another myth. Oh, like, where'd you get your protein from? You don't have complete proteins, like sources of complete proteins. Well, we do. Like soya is a great source of complete protein, and that can come in so many different forms, like soya milk, tempeh, tofu, etc. And what's another one? Another one is fasted cardio. There's literally no evidence to kind of suggest that it's better than, let's call it feeding, like having food before your cardio, in terms of weight loss, muscle gain, in terms of increasing your metabolism. So there's no need. If you don't like, say, breakfast in the morning, that's absolutely fine. You don't have to do cardio or any exercise fueled. It's just, in terms of performance, it's definitely necessary. If you want to kind of make the most of your performance and make sure you kind of do whatever you're doing to the best of your ability and get the maximum output, then definitely eat before you do that, and a good few hours before if you can. Yeah.
That's really, really good. I do find protein shakes kind of a difficult topic because I can understand why people would have protein shakes. If you're athletic, you're trying to build muscle mass, taking that protein where you're not getting other protein elsewhere is probably right. But I would imagine that 9 out of 10 people are taking protein just for the sake of it because they say they should. Someone said that they should do, and they can't process it all because they've already got, especially if you're a weightlifter, you're probably going to be, if you're not vegan or vegetarian, you're probably going to be eating lots of chicken, lots of brown rice. I mean, that's a stereotype of a weightlifter. Chicken and rice, chicken and brown rice, boring foods. But if you did an analysis of that person's protein intake, they've probably got more protein than their body can actually process, and what all they're doing is just really passing it through.
Yeah. It's a tricky one. It again depends what your goal is. If you are like into weightlifting and want to really increase your muscle mass, then obviously you need a lot more protein than someone who doesn't. But you can kind of have up to 2 grams per kilo of body weight for that. But if your goal is weight loss and you're not really fast on building lots of muscle, then kind of stick to 1.2 to 1.4 grams of protein per kilo of body weight. Like, that's absolutely fine. And there was one meta-analysis I read actually which said that there was no kind of increase in muscle mass or kind of strength-based performance for people that ate over 1.4 grams per kilo of body weight of protein a day. So it goes to show like the evidence that we have, it is mixed anyway, and we still don't really know 100% what is best. Obviously it's better to have more than less, but if you are especially not vegan, then you can easily get your protein from normal meals, and you probably don't need a protein shake. Whereas us vegans, like there are less protein sources, like that's just a fact. So it might be easier to get your protein from a protein shake. And if you're like on the go, if you work, if you're always moving, then it's just easy for just to have that. But again, it's not necessary. But also the like bioavailability of your protein does matter as well. So that is kind of how your body absorbs that protein. And studies have shown that for vegans, for kind of soy protein, it can be more bioavailable if you do have it in a protein shake, because normal plants kind of contain certain like chemicals which can basically kind of prevent the absorption of protein. So that's another thing to think of. That is kind of a new kind of finding. But then if you're eating enough protein anyway, then that should be fine. It's just a new finding, which I found really interesting. So I've actually added a protein shake to my diet because of it, just for the ease. But then if you don't follow a vegan diet, then that doesn't follow, because meat doesn't contain the same kind of nutrients and chemicals that plants contain. So yeah.
I think B12. I mean, the only supplements I take is vitamin D supplements during the winter. I don't take them during the summer because we've got it naturally available from the sun. B12, I drink enough soya milk really to, looking at how much soy B12 you get in soya, to really substitute what you would get in meat.
Yeah. Okay, that's good then. As long as you're aware of it, then there's no need to supplement again. And you can get things which are fortified in B12 as well. So I think that Outpro soy milk is fortified. Nutritional yeast, that's got loads of B12 in. Marmite. But then again, if you're kind of not sure, then have a little research. Maybe track one day to see how much you're eating, and then kind of determine yourself whether you should be supplementing or not. But definitely be aware of that. And iron, again, is another one that you should be aware of, especially if you're a woman with a kind of regular menstrual cycle. So yeah,
I think the important factor is do your research, really. I mean, don't believe what people say on adverts, really.
When you research, don't research off social media or kind of normal magazines which kind of have an incentive to sell you something. Research on something which is a lot more trustworthy. Like, it may be boring, but some journals, if you're not sure, you can ask me. That's fine. You can always message me. I'm here to answer anyone's questions. Or I really like the website called examine.com. I don't know if you've heard of it, but that's kind of the only website which I found which has really unbiased information, and it kind of sums up everything for you really simply and easily, and you know it's trustworthy because they make sure that they don't sell any products apart from the information that they're giving.
I'll check that out. I will check that out. I haven't heard of that, but yeah.
Well, so definitely check that out.
Sounds good.
A lot from them. That's basically where I've got lots of my information from. So yeah,
that's really useful, really handy. I just, in terms of kind of, we've touched upon most of the kind of food groups, but hydration. So hydration is really important, obviously. It's more important for the longer kind of duration of training or races. In fact, it's critical. And there's, I've seen some cases where people have ended up in hospital, because they've not only just focused on hydration, but also replacing salts, which is vital for kind of long distance, especially if you're working in a hot climate. How have you got any tips around kind of hydration for training or races?
So the general rule is to kind of have 1 milliliter of water for every calorie that you burn. And an easy way you can kind of work that out pre-race, so training, you can kind of work out how much water you need for an event, is weigh yourself before and after. And then, so for example, if you lose a kilo in your workout, you should times it by 1.5, and that should be however many milliliters or liters you need. So if you lose a kilo, you should replenish with 1.5 liters of water. And you can then kind of like divide that by 4, so however many milliliters every 15 minutes or 20 minutes. But the general rule is to keep sipping, don't just gulp it, because that's an absolute waste, and you're only allowed to carry a few bottles, aren't you? So you don't want to waste that if you're doing an Ironman. But definitely sip throughout, and also follow your cues. Like if you're feeling thirsty, that's okay. Drink some more. That's the kind of first thing we should be looking to, not any kind of calculation or anything. If you're feeling thirsty, have some water. And obviously make sure to replenish what's after. If it's hot weather, then you will need to drink more, depending on how much you sweat. There are different calculations for that, but you can always message me and ask me.
I'm so deficient on drinking during training and races. It's my weakest area. I tend to only drink if I feel thirsty, and that's often not a good thing to do. Again, it's going back to kind of intuitive kind of nutrition. I tend, for example, if I'm doing a bike session, it's an hour long, I'll take a 750 milliliter bottle of water with salts in, so isotonic. And I probably will sip that 2 or 3 times during the entire training session, but not take any more. And then afterwards think, I feel thirsty now, and then I'll start drinking.
Okay, someone like you, maybe you could work it out, and then kind of maybe set an alarm, especially if you're doing, I don't know if you have a turbo bike.
Turbo.
Set an alarm on your watch or something to kind of remind you every 15 or 20 minutes just to have a good few sips. And then you'll know kind of how much to sip. Like every kind of sports bottle has the like milliliters on it, doesn't it? So you can kind of see, even whilst you're running or cycling, you can kind of hold it up and see how much you drank quickly, and then drink some more and put it away for another however long that you need to. But yeah, maybe if you do forget to drink, try and work it out. You can set an alarm.
I will try that, actually. I will try that. I've never done that before, but I will. I think I can set it on my watch. I can set it on my watch as well, but I will try that.
Yeah, really simple. And then you can kind of learn from that, and it'll become a habit. So then you won't need to do it anymore. I'm sure if you do it for a few training sessions, then you stop it, you'll remember. It'll just become part of your routine. So yeah, just make everything a habit.
Brilliant. So just in terms of kind of wrapping up, so can we just talk about you as a nutritionist and the services you provide? Because as I mentioned to you before this podcast, I think there is lots of people that need help with nutrition. And so, when we spoke originally about coming onto the podcast, you've just qualified. Congratulations, by the way. Just qualified on your degree in biomedicine, but you are a nutritionist and you do offer nutritionist services. So I will pop a link in the description in the description of this podcast. But do you want to just kind of talk about the sorts of things that you can help people with?
Yeah, so I do nutrition coaching, where I can just kind of coach you on your needs. I can do an initial consultation if you like. If you don't feel like you need coaching regularly, but you're just unsure of some things, then we can have an hour to a 2-hour call, where we just kind of discuss everything, and I give you tips and advice or work out things for you, like the water intake, or I'm actually setting up a nutrition course, which I'm looking to teach, and that should be running, I'm not sure on the exact date, but I've just got a scholarship for uni for this idea, so I will let you know when that's ready, but probably October, November time. I'm looking to kind of set up a course on the general basics of nutrition, and how to identify a fad diet from a non-fad diet, and give you the kind of information you need to carry out through whatever it is you want to do. And yeah, that's about it. I was doing flexible meal plans, like nutrition plans, where I kind of create that meal plan with you, and make sure that it's flexible and give you lots of different options. But because of this nutrition course, I'm no longer doing that as it's taken up a lot of time. But that could be resuming in the new year. But again, if anyone has any questions, just ask me.
Well, you can put me down on the course. I'll definitely come to that.
Yeah.
That would be
Oh,
great.
thank you.
That would be great. Yeah, for those that are listening, check out Izzy's Instagram account. She has some really, really helpful tips, and I'm not just saying that because you're on the podcast. They are. I mean, I've followed the tips that you've had on there. Just the bite-sized tips as to what you should be looking out for in terms of, and some of the facts around kind of nutrition. And your recipes as well. As a vegan, I find food quite boring and often run out of ideas. So it's quite good to kind of steal other people's ideas for dinner time. But yeah, check out Izzy's Instagram account.
Thank you.
So what about just to wrap up, what about your fitness goals? So you did a triathlon. When was it? 2 years ago, was it?
It was in September.
It was in September.
Yeah. And I loved it. It was so good. But I have had a knee injury that's kind of set me back with the running. But I've really got into cycling, so I'm thinking of doing some kind of cycling event, particularly with hills, like 100-miler with lots of hills or something. Because I'm so small, I tend to be, hills are kind of what I'm good at. But I would definitely like to get another triathlon in once I've done all my rehab with my knee. But yeah, I really enjoyed it.
Do the London 100.
Do you think? Have you done it?
No. No, but it sounds like a good one to do.
Yeah.
I'll
have a look.
Have a look at it. I mean, there's quite a lot of sportives now that they do quite a lot of sportives around sort of kind of 50, 100-mile bike rides. But yeah, I've always fancied doing them. But I have to admit, I signed up to one last year in the New Forest, and then didn't do it. I mean, it has 3 different distances. I'll have to put the description. But yeah, I signed up to do it, but didn't do it because of the pandemic, and it was just it was a pain to kind of travel. My parents live in the New Forest, so it starts right next to their house. So, but I do want to do that. That sounds great. But yeah, so I hope your knee recovers, and I hope you get to do another triathlon. But yeah, as you said, do something that to work around it. A cycle ride should be good.
Exactly. No, I'm really enjoying it.
Well, thank you for coming onto the podcast. I found that really, really fascinating and interesting. And as I said, there's a lot of people that seem to need help with nutrition. It is always the subject that seems to come up whenever I speak to anyone around kind of tips around kind of nutrition. So your services, I think, would be really valued. So
I do also give talks to clubs and that. So if any club kind of needs someone to give any nutrition advice, then just give me a shout, and I'm happy to do that as well. But yeah,
definitely. Well, thank you for coming onto the podcast.
Thanks for having me. Have a lovely day.
And you.